Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Good morning, Cardinals. Hope you guys are great. Happy Monday. It's Mr. Schmidt. I'm hoping you guys are doing well. Hope you enjoyed your weekend. I'm currently recording this video on Saturday afternoon here, March 21st, and it is very quiet out here at school. Hope you guys are safe, feeling great, enjoying time with your family. But yes, this video is for class time Monday morning. So without further ado, let's dive right on in. So first thing, just a reminder, kind of what your daily routine for class should kind of look like, whether that's my class or other classes. Signing into Blackbaud, and once you get signed in, head on over to view my bulletin board. You can see all of these helpful links. After you sign in, you're ready to get going on my class. Click on Google Classroom, and then you're going to find kind of my work that's planned for today. So right now it's scheduled, so it's not quite viewable yet. But you're going to see the daily class directions. So usually it'll say watch the video below, videos just like the one I'm making right now, and then any sort of further follow-up directions, whether that's an assignment, a discussion post, some sort of larger project that you're going to be working on in the future. So each day that should kind of be your routine. Logging into Blackbaud, checking out what's going on, heading on over to Classroom to start working on my class. And then I also have a direct link in Blackbaud if you just want to go straight to my YouTube to access the video of the day. So you can see the video that I made the other day. And on Monday, you'll be able to view this video through my channel. So that's kind of your process. Again, if you have questions on kind of, I still don't know how to do it. I still don't know what's going on. You guys are smart individuals, but no worries if you do have a question about how to do all of these things. So specifically for our class, we were, for the craziness of last week, we're talking about John's Gospel. So remember, we had our tests towards the end of the third quarter. We're starting the fourth quarter now, and we're starting to talk about John's Gospel. And John's Gospel is really unique. He's a very unique apostle, very, very close to Jesus. Today, I just want to recap a little bit of some things we touched on early on last week, and into the week before that. It's been a little bit, so we're just going to do a little bit of review and get you guys going on the assignment, which is due at the end of day 2. So more on that at the end of this video. But first, if you remember, who was John? So John's Gospel is written by the Apostle John, obviously. And as you can see here, he's the one that's depicted right next to the Blessed Virgin Mary, the crucifixion here. He's depicted to Christ's right here in Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting of the Last Supper. And he was one of Jesus's closest apostles, okay? I think that's important to keep in mind, that we're reading the very words of a man who knew Jesus very, very closely. He, in fact, refers to himself, remember, as the beloved disciple, or the disciple whom Jesus loved. In his own very writing, he says that. So he knew the Lord very well. They were friends for a long time. He, in fact, was called by the Lord himself during Christ's very beginning of his public ministry. So this is actually from Matthew's Gospel. But we read how John was called to leave his former way of life and follow this man who he had only just met, but he knew to be the Messiah. So this is how John was called. As Jesus walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. So what I think is really cool about how Matthew describes the way that St. John was called to follow Jesus is that immediately he left everything in his life to follow the Lord, including their job, their career, their family. Him and his brother St. James the Greater, who is also an apostle, left everything as fishermen and joined Simon, who's later referred to as Peter in the Gospels, to follow this Jesus, and that's kind of how everything begins. And these three apostles turned out to be three of Jesus' closest companions. Okay, there's 12 apostles, but like I mentioned in class, like you might have a friend group, and like within that larger friend group, you kind of have your 2 or 3 people who you're really close with. That was what Peter, James, and John, that was their relationship with Jesus. So the other 12, like they were kind of the in crowd that Jesus, as we read, took them aside to show them certain things or had them do certain things that he didn't ask the others to do, such as, preparing the Last Supper for them. And in fact, John was the only apostle to remain with Jesus during the crucifixion. Other things about him, I mentioned he was the brother to St. James the Greater. He's also the longest living apostle and the only one not to die a martyr's death. As we know, 10 of the 11 apostles died the death of a martyr. Obviously, we know Judas took his own life. But what we do know about St. John is that he died around the age close to 100 years old of natural causes. Okay, so that's a little bit about who he was. When was his gospel written? We didn't really cover this all that much in class. So, like the authorship of some of the other gospels, it's debated when John's gospel was written, but most scholars generally agree that John's gospel was written last in order of time compared to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Most experts, an even smaller group, would agree that somewhere between 90 to 100 AD was when John wrote his gospel. He also wrote, as you know, the book of Revelation, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, which are basically short letters that he wrote. Those were all written on the island of Patmos, which is kind of near Greece today, somewhere between 90 to 100 AD. Some scholars say particularly the year 96, but for our purposes, somewhere between 90 to 100 AD. So that's like 20, 25 years after Matthew, Mark, and Luke were roughly written. The purpose or the audience of John's gospel, basically towards the end of John's gospel, he's very clear that says, the purpose of this gospel was written so that you may believe that Christ is the Son of God, that Christ is who he said he was. And so this gospel is kind of a universal gospel. It's written for Jews. There's a lot of Jewish cultural references in this book, but also for non-Jews. This book is easily accessible and readable for both audiences. John was writing it for people who were Jews and weren't quite sure whether Jesus was the Lord, and for the larger Mediterranean world, who most of them weren't even Jews at all. So they needed to learn about who this Jesus was. So there are cultural contexts for Jews in there, but there are also styles that were more friendly to, for example, Samaritans. The story of the Good Samaritan is a story that's unique to John's gospel. So that's a little bit about his audience and when his gospel was written. Okay. So if you remember these symbols, which hopefully you do, John is depicted as an eagle. But if you remember on the test, we talked, or in the unit leading up to our previous test, we talked about how Matthew is depicted as an angel or a divine man. Luke is depicted as an ox, and Mark is depicted by most sacred artists as a lion. Okay, so the purpose of each gospel, or if you remember, well over a few weeks ago, we kind of talked about, well, why do different gospel authors kind of describe Jesus differently or write different stories or use different words? Well, we have to remember that the authors were human. Okay, so these are inspired books from God, but God didn't exactly tell them what to write word for word. And so what that means is each author kind of has a different perspective on the same Jesus. They each have a different style and unique way of portraying Christ that kind of contributes to the whole gospel, the whole series of 4 books that we have. And so Matthew kind of stresses the human origin of Jesus. He's depicted as a man or an angelic man, kind of bridging the gap between Jesus being both God and man. Luke is depicted as an ox. That's a symbol for sacrifice. He talks his gospel is very long. He really goes into detail about Christ's crucifixion. Mark's gospel, it's the shortest gospel of the 4, so you can gave that joke, very bad joke. You can roar through it very quickly. If you're reading it, it's only 15 or 16 chapters. But Mark's gospel also begins in the wilderness. Okay, so like you have a lion. Lions are usually found in the wilderness. Begins in the wilderness with John the Baptist. John's gospel, however, begins with is depicted as an eagle. So John's symbol is an eagle. You can see that down there on the right side. So John is different from the others. And so what we know, a lot of scholarly experts have found that, look, Matthew, Mark, and Luke come from a lot of the same source material. So what that means is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, if you read them side by side to each other, they're very, very close and connected. They share a lot of the same source information. You remember what synoptic means? That means same eye. So like literally, a lot of the stories in Matthew, Mark, and Luke are almost the same word for word. However, with John, he didn't share any of the source information as Matthew, Mark, and Luke. If you remember a moment ago, I told you that his gospel was written close to 25, even 30 years after the synoptic gospels. Well, what's he trying to write about then? John goes kind of a different direction in his gospel. He's depicted as an eagle. When you think about his Christology, Christology is basically a study of Christ. So the word or the root ology is study of. So Christology is study of Christ. John's Christology is a very spiritual, deep, very high perspective about Jesus. Okay, so like a lot of these stories in John are written. They might be similar to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There are a few that are unique to John. They're written in such a way to kind of show the divine perspective that Christ is God in the flesh. They're really stressing the divine nature of Jesus, that this Jesus isn't some ordinary man. Okay, so like it's written from, if you read through John, you're going to notice that his gospel really stresses the fact that Jesus was God. Okay, not to say that the other gospels don't or that they didn't do a good enough job, but John took a lot more liberty as an author, let's say, to write in such a spiritual, deep, theological way because of and thanks to Matthew, Mark, and Luke had already written a very, very accurate historical gospel, especially Luke, that John could kind of base the fact that his audiences have likely already read those gospels. So John can kind of take it further and make people think more deeply about who Jesus was. And it's important to kind of keep that in mind as you read through John. It might sound super different than some of the other gospels. But again, that's not a bad thing. He's portraying Christ in a different way. The same Christ, but portrayed in different ways, leads to a greater overall image of who he was. Okay, so that's a little bit about a review, an overview of kind of where we've been, kind of what we're walking through right now as a class, and a little bit more about John. Now, today's assignment is going to be posted. It's already posted online as you're watching this. It's going to be due by 4 p.m. on day 2 of this week. So keep in mind, we're following, at least for my class, I'm not quite so certain what the other classes are currently following. So if classes are totally working different from with, say, your science class and things are kind of mixed up, shoot me a message because I want to hear how other teachers are structuring their deadlines. But for my class, for instance, first period, you have me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you're sixth period and you're watching this, you have me Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And if you're seventh period, you have me Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So your work schedule will be the exact same even though you're at home right now. So for instance, for first and sixth period, the homework assignment today is due 4 p.m. tomorrow, which for you guys all is day 2. For seventh period, the homework assignment from today's class is due on Wednesday because day 2 for you guys is Wednesday. If that doesn't make sense, please message me so we can make sure we're all on the same page with that. But today's assignment is posted on Google Classroom, and basically the purpose is I want you guys to put into practice kind of some of the major themes of John's Christology. You're going to see that when you open the assignment and kind of read through the directions, what I'm looking for. Again, keep in mind those deadlines. Deadline 4 p.m. the following day of class. If you do have any questions today, I am available at 11 a.m. We're all kind of getting through this together. So wide open to talk, to check in. If you have any questions regarding kind of what we're doing for this assignment, please let me know. I'm available again 11 a.m. today, which is Monday, March 23rd at 11 a.m. The link is, I believe it's still there, right down here. So if you go and view a classroom, this is the link. You'll need to have to set up the Zoom software first, which there are directions to that on the front page of St. Michael, the Blackbaud page. And again, if you're overwhelmed, don't know how to set up Zoom or need help with anything at all, shoot me a message. I want to be a resource to you, as I'm sure much of your other teachers are doing so as well. So that's all I have. Assignment directions will be listed up here as you open up Classroom on Monday. And again, I will see you guys tomorrow, and God bless.